Our next panel is going to examine best practices and lessons learned when it comes to scaling up the EV charging business. You notice we have a kind of a recurring theme at this year's conference, Scaling Up. But before we get to the discussion with our experts, we will hear a brief overview from Eugen Hildebrandt. He is Associate Partner and Global Leader, EV Charging Practice at McKinsey & Company. So Eugen, welcome. We can't wait to hear your overview and your presentation. Here you come.
So hi everyone. I was given sharp 10 minutes for actually content that goes way longer than 10 minutes, so excuse for brevity, and I'm going quite quickly through the presentation. McKinsey is not a CPO. You probably know McKinsey from plenty of PowerPoint slides, but what you don't know is, to your surprise, we have been building networks for the last couple of 5 years. I think we have built more than 10 businesses, and I'm going to talk about a few learnings from those business builds. I'm going to tease up the panel and share a few high-level insights from the industry which we have gathered. We had an interesting discussion from the OEM panelists, so let's stick with the electric vehicle. I think this is very much common knowledge, right? It's just an example, a Lucid model. And when I say it's common knowledge, everyone talks about charging curves. So this one, average charging power 150 kW, from 20 to 80%. It's in 30 minutes. And then you can actually replenish roughly 20 kilometers in a minute, all in ideal conditions. This is just an example, right? So what's rather more interesting for you is, where is the journey going to go next? And this is kind of an outlook of a few OEMs out in the market, codified to see where they're going with their system voltage, the max current, and what's actually going to be the charging power the different vehicles are going to be able to pull. While I was speaking about 150 on average for a Lucid, you can probably see that on the curve rather to the right-hand side. We're going to see numbers of 200, 300, 400 kilowatts. This is not going to happen tomorrow. We still have to wait 1-2 vehicle platforms for this to see, but this is still on the roadmap. It's on the roadmap, and we'll see it happen by the end of the decade. Now, changing perspective, let's look at the CPOs, and let's look what they're actually doing. This is a German perspective, and before I go through the different coloring, let's look at the bubbles at the bottom. The German market is predominantly played by utilities. More than 30%, a third of the market, is covered by utilities. And we know the frontrunner, EnBW, quite big, 800 stations, and the rest is a bit blurred here. The second surprise is retailers. All have figured out that they need to provide a additional value proposition to the customers, lock them in, staying a bit longer, or they have figured out that they actually can make some money with the charging business while they have their own locations directly in front of the grocery stores. Scale-ups, only 10%. Our friends from Allego, Fastnet, Ionity, right, to our surprise, everyone's trying to be pan-European, hence why you probably see that each of the individual markets do really represent a smaller share, while in aggregate they have a quite large network. And then the other surprise is our friends from oil and gas. It's only 5% in total, right? While they still sit on a large footprint of gas stations, which they might turn over for charging, at the moment it's only 5%. And the last information here is, it's still a fragmented market. You see the bottom right, 35-40% roughly is all covered by smaller local players. In Germany, there is used to be for many years now the famous joke about every mayor has a charging station, die Bürgermeisterladesäule, so people know this. And this still does exist, but we expect that this will start consolidating over the next years. The next interesting information here is, and this is the color coding, you see different CPOs, they do have different locations, different portfolios of these. Some of them are more homogeneous, trying to capture value across every location with the customers. Some of them are more heavy towards fast food restaurants. I think they were pretty much lucky with a convincing argument why they should put their chargers there. So hence why the network was growing like by 200, 300%. Or you see other networks very much tilted towards the highway, right? Again, it's on the one hand, it's a risk because the highway operators do also appreciate that this is very attractive land and might push someone out and introduce their own concepts. On the other hand, and this is something which we're going to see on the next chart, the highway operators, they're today, for the last 14 months, operating at a time utilization of above 15%. Above 15%, and this is rule of thumb, will just give you more than 10% return on invest. So this is great. And if you look at the mixed portfolios, 5 to 10%, this is not bad either. And it's not bad because today we have 10% of the vehicles, electric vehicles on the roads, while we have today 1 million vehicles on the road, while we expect 10 electric vehicles on the road by 2030. So utilization is only to go up. Last chart with numbers, a bit complicated to explain, and then I'll share a few learnings about the business builds. What we see here at the bottom is the charger utilization. We see a white curve which tells you what percentage of my network is actually operating at this time utilization. So the reading example here is 12% of my network, this is a DC network as an example, operates at 22% time utilization. And then when you account for all the cost, OPEX, CAPEX, terminal value of the chargers, right, you will yield 30% IRR. So this example network, it's not representative for the German market, shows that 60% of the chargers are already today profitable, if we would use IRR as a representative metric. So this is a very charming and interesting exercise every CPO should do for themselves, just to understand how profitable and economically viable their business is set up. Moving next and talking a bit about the lessons learned of scaling the businesses. I'll talk first about the strategic topics and then give you a rundown about the implementation-related ones. The first one is, it's very important that you have a clear aspiration. It's defining not what you want to do, it's why you want to do it, why you want to have a home business, why do you want to build your own software. This is very important. Are you doing the business because you want to enhance sales, or is it just for profit? And this is the number one topic which was causing friction at every management level over 1 to 2 years after the business was up and running. You should have a short as well as a long-term plan. There are different objectives, short-term and mid-term. Define what you want to do yourself and structure your partnerships and contracts properly. This is important. There are plenty of pitfalls. You'll see on the next slides that the partnerships are mostly overestimated at the moment. The industry is very nascent, and you have so many offerings, and it's very difficult to judge who is actually capable and who's not. And then the last one is really be open what the customers want and what they need and adapt accordingly. For the last 3 minutes, I'd like to walk you through 10 observations when we were actually holding the shovels, building the business, and facing actually the very first thing is a timeline. Every timeline we were exposed to, every timeline our clients were exposed to, they were all unrealistic. Either internal or to the public, no matter if you were to introduce new features for your CPMS or a backend, or you were waiting for your switchgears or power cabinets, none of the timelines, I would say 99% of the time, were not met. If so, then you were probably lucky or you were just the master of the business. Second one is something I was touching upon briefly, too much faith in partnerships. There's a general tendency to overestimate capabilities of partners. And the second one is, if someone wants to enter the business who is pretty new to that sphere, there's not actually a potent white label solution for the entire system. Not for hardware, not for CPMS. You don't find a one-size-fits-it-all so you can easily enter and scale a business. It's rather more complex than one might anticipate. It's a new charging experience. I think we have been talking about this quite extensively on the last panels and presentations. Location, 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 location. Something which was underestimated for a very long time. Land lease for parking lots has tripled over the last 2 years. Last week, I have seen a deal where someone was brokering a highway location for 150,000 euros only for a commission, right? They still need to pay the rent and the lease for the next 20 years, right? I would say 5 years ago, the number was around 1,000 euros, just out of curiosity. Hardware is hard. I think Mikael from ICNC23 is going to talk about it. It's not only about supply chain. We have different architectures. We have varying, actually, product qualities, firmware. Someone's promising you to patch it for 2 or 3 years. It's still not working. We have seen the landscape of the hardware players changing a lot, and we have seen new winners. I think if I were to exclude the number 1 player, we still see that from 2 to 10, it's still a bit of a mixed bag. And then the last one is China's on the horizon. Probably if I were to ask anyone on the first row to name me a few hardware players in Europe, he would count 5. In China, there are 30. I'm seeing my time clock running down. I'll just accelerate. Software continues evolving fast. We have standards, we have protocols, we have different features. Grid is a bottleneck for everyone, so don't cry, don't complain. Everyone is exposed to this, so set up dedicated processes and be ahead of the game. Professionalize your growth. And this is something which is coming very new to the agenda of the management. You need to master how you manage your P&L for cash and for evaluation. This is becoming very important. You have seen the chart. The profitability is inside, but you have to manage it properly. Over-indexed on right talent and expertise. I think there are more LinkedIn posts and research papers out there in the market. So don't trust everyone who claims to know something about it, but really go for the right talent, go for the experienced people. This will accelerate your journey and cut the timeline short. And then the last one is basically think big. And why should you think big? Number 1, charging sessions by 2030. This will go up from 3 to 10. Charging speed will add 30 kilowatts. These are just estimates and rough numbers, so very much simplified. Charging duration probably going down to 20, 50 minutes. Utilization 15 to 20%. And then in the end, this is what we all care about. We're going to deliver way, way more energy than what we do today. And again, and this is going to become a self-sustaining, profitable business. Thank you very much, and happy to speak with my panel colleagues about this topic.
Yeah, again, thank you very much indeed. See, he already knows not to sit into the moderator's chair, so very good, because otherwise you would have to moderate the whole conversation. So now let's get everybody else back on stage. Gosh, it's such a big panel. I think I'm going to even move my chair, otherwise I won't be able to see everybody. So we have got Dr. Torben Fogg from Spiri. We have Daniel Brown from ChargePoint. We have Emmanuel Moreira from EVA Global, and we have Michael Maletsky from EcoEnergetica. Gentlemen, let's do it. Welcome. Eugen, that was a very intense overview of some of the pitfalls of scaling. I mean, you really spelled it out for everybody. But did he leave something out? So are there any other kinds of pitfalls that you can think of that maybe we can look at the challenges first and then we can talk about the solutions? So when it comes to building a charging business, what else do we really need to watch out for from your experience?
I have a suggestion, if I may.
Sure.
And you can hit me hard afterwards if you already mentioned it and I totally overheard you. But I think one thing that could be worth putting a lot of focus on is operational excellence. The ability to have a stable platform, IT secure, you have 24/7 service, you know that you have critical infrastructure, say for trucks, for vans, for cars that need to charge fast. Personally, I see DC infrastructure to be critical infrastructure. But in order to deliver the services to the owners of the infrastructure who have done all the high investments and to the users, operational excellence, I think, is a key topic that could be worth dwelling a little bit with, at least seen through my eyes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe if I can chime in on the same thing. So I think there was a lot of problems that were listed. One thing I would say, just to start off, is that there are software solutions for a lot of that, right? If installers aren't able to deliver on timelines, like visibility is the next best thing. Being able to monitor uptime of the public charging network, being able to have proactive alerts on hardware, all this stuff is what's going to be able to see us through to the next phase of growth. It's not entirely sort of doom and gloom. The other piece I would mention is it was brilliant, but also very, very focused on the extremely important DC market section, but there is a whole ecosystem of charging services that are out there, home charging, workplace, other AC services that are also, in our experience, the majority of the overall sessions that get done.
Mm-hmm. And Manuel, the perspective from EVA?
Definitely, well, let's put it like this. One of the key factors here is not only standardizing, but also making sure that every single piece of software, every single piece of hardware that you use is adding value to the ecosystem that you've built. So creating something that is agnostic, completely solution, it delivers a solution, but agnostic on the input that you use in, I would say that's one of the most important things to be able to scale.
Did you want to add something, Eugen?
Yeah, I'd like to react to what Torben said. It's a very valid point. I just would like to make it a bit more provocative. If you were to look at the uptimes of the different CPOs, we see across the board uptimes of 98, 99, 99.5%. If you consider Tesla, they had constantly 99.5% and even above for the last 4 years. So the question is, operational excellence is important. What we have seen, it's even more important before the stage, before you commission the chargers, right? Just to get everything to the site, do the civil work, connect everything, and make it run. While you run it, you probably have great solutions from Spirit and EVA Global. There are plenty of services which are very much capable of maintaining at 99.5%. But then the other challenge occurs, maybe question then to Michael is, how do you manage then the after sales market of the hardware once it's really broken? Because this is so far an untapped field. But for the session of the chargers are up there and running, I would say CPOs are very much satisfied for today with 99.5%. And this is thanks to EVA Global and thanks to Spirit.
Do you want to add something? Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
You can go.
One thing is the setting up everything initially, but at some point, something will go wrong. It could be a new firmware from the provider. It could be a new firmware or other software releases from the operator or something like that. So as part of the operational excellence, I think when things goes wrong, then you need the organization and the teams to work precisely and efficient in order to get things up and running very fast again. And of course, you're right, having a high uptime, then it must be working well, right? But it's not always that easy, and I think therefore it's worth dwelling a little bit with it. I could mention something else, scalability across countries, across currencies, across languages as well, as something that is part of the operational excellence if you are in different markets.
Okay, so maybe we can, if you're in different markets, I can pick up on that. Daniel, ChargePoint, as I understand, is headquartered in the US. Is that correct? Yeah. So, what does then scaling mean from your perspective? And maybe you can tell us if there are any lessons on scaling that you could perhaps transfer from the US, let's say, to Europe, or what things have had to be adapted a little bit. So what are scaling lessons that you can bring from the US?
I think it's also scaling lessons that we can bring from Europe to the US. So it's a big sort of dialogue across the ocean here. So maybe just a tiny bit about us. So we manufacture hardware, we provide in-house support services as well as enable sort of third-party support services. We are a CPO, we are an EMSP, we have solutions for fleet, sort of home leasing company, sort of truck and depot charging. We are sort of active across all the different sort of verticals. And we are also not an asset owner, right? So we are an ecosystem enabler is sort of how we'd sort of call it. I think one of the big sort of, well, maybe I'll start by saying for everybody, scaling looks the same. It's one port at a time, right? It's actually getting something in the ground, certifying it, it works. All right, we're happy with that, moving on to the next one. But then it's scale to us looks like all the wider kind of support services that sort of support that as well. So making sure all the internal processes are fully aligned, you're embedded really nicely with the customer training is in place so that everybody knows what they're looking for, what is supposed to work in a certain way, what isn't supposed to work in a certain way. I think one of the big other pieces of scaling was, I don't know how many people in the industry remember the fabulous Has2Be platform, now known as ChargePoint Austria. I think that was a big cultural shift for us. We are used to, as a company, being very, very hands-on with providing sort of hardware uptime, sort of software support. It's sort of an Apple ecosystem, right? It's sticky, it's a nice, all-inclusive, wonderful thing that you come to know and love. And the Be Energized model really sort of, which is the product of former Has2Be, really opened, I think, the company's eyes to what we call the solution partner model, where we give a customer and a partner the building blocks to be successful themselves. We enable people to assemble things, build their own models, bring in their own hardware. And I think that already is and will continue to be a huge part of our scaling journey in both continents.
We haven't heard from Michael yet. I'd be curious to hear your take on anything that you've heard. So what does scaling mean to you? And maybe if you also want to comment on the challenges of scaling. Did Eugen cover all of them? Did he leave something out? Was he too pessimistic? What's your take?
I'm here as a charger producer. I represent the charger producers, and Eugen raised up the question about after sales. And this is the very important topic now, because as we see, sometimes the after sales takes more time from our perspective than, for example, design a new solution. Because this solution, for example, is delivered to many different CPOs, and we meet with different requirements. And typically, this in theory is the same one model of charger, but must be customizable by configuration, not only painting, yeah? But the biggest impact is on the software. And software must be perfect, software must be easy updated, very flexible configuration, and everything what must be as a product. We must deliver this software and this software will be managed by our customer, not by us at the beginning of this adventure with e-mobility. Yeah? The producer helped customers at the beginning with customization, with configuration. Now, currently, we deliver the full solution, which is managed by our customer. And configuration is very, very difficult. And it's not easy to deliver solution which meet every requirements on the market. This is one of the pitfalls from my point of view. Yeah? Different requirements, a lot of these requirements for the producer of charging stations.
I think it was Daniel who said in the beginning that a lot of these things can be solved with software. So is that true? And what things can be? Or I'm sorry,
I would actually,
Manuel, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would actually like to challenge a bit more on the hardware manufacturers as well. I think servicing the chargers should be looked into not from only a servicing perspective, but I know a few of the manufacturers already look at it from a concept perspective, from a design perspective. And I would say it should start, servicing the charger should start within the design of the charger itself. Rather than looking at it after the charger is off the line, you've built a really small charger that you can place everywhere, it looks nice, but then it takes you 3 hours to replace a screw inside the charger. Definitely that's a way to increase the downtime of the charger, and it's what we need to fight in this industry as well. One of the things we need to fight into.
Did you want to add something? Yeah?
Yeah, I was reflecting a little bit on all the good words you said initially and what we see maybe driven a little bit off the market, but also from the political side. For instance, the updated AFI regulation requiring on the 10T network of motorways much more hardware, both for trucks and for normal cars and so on. It's good for all of us. It will drive the acceleration even up in higher speeds, I would say. But with the future just around the corner and all the constraints we probably a lot of us already see when we want to set chargers in the ground, then I think it's super important to focus on how we can unlock parallel revenues so that the big investments in infrastructure in the ground can have a better return on investment. at least it's something that we have spent quite a lot of time on in theory, so that we can help our CPOs have a better return on investment by, for instance, just to mention one example, to implement good demand response functionality that can give parallel revenues to the CPOs from the hardware or from combination of the hardware with grid supporting infrastructure like batteries, for instance. I think this becomes even more and more important now, where we see the fast run to the land grabbing, as you also mentioned, and also with more and more power required for faster and faster charging, and more cars coming into the market. I think this will be a key area for the future in order to cope with the large investments. At the same time, I think the society can benefit on maybe not having to strengthen or reinforcing the electrical grid as fast as otherwise anticipated, which in itself is billions of euros that needs to be thrown into to that part. If we just believe that we can get grid connection fast enough for all the hardware that will be set up. So in my naive view, demand response technologies and how to drive profit out of that by helping the grid and avoiding the large otherwise investments is a key for the platforms the operators are using in the future.
Okay, you touched about so many different things. Let's break it down a little bit. So I'm not going to forget my question about software, but since we've been talking a bit about hardware, then let me just go back a bit and point out the fact that hardware is, after all, still very expensive. Like, that's a huge investment, and it also takes a lot of money to maintain it. So how do you think that needs to be managed? Just having to take into account how much money has to be invested in building and then maintaining the hardware. And you want to be profitable. Right?
I don't know if any of us own a lot of hardware,
yeah.
given our models. I'm not sure if we can.
Yeah.
But you could say as little as possible. So you need to have a high uptime. You need to be able to operate it at all times. If it breaks down, you need to fix it. But you would want to spend as little as possible on maintaining the hardware. So choosing the right hardware for the right application is probably key.
What makes it right? So let's be specific. So when you're choosing your hardware, then what do you need to pay attention to?
What problem are you trying to solve? Sorry to interrupt. Right? It's not just about utilization. Of course, if you're building a DC network, that's your primary goal. But it's also about all the wider ecosystem benefits to your business, or to your hotel, or to your parking, or the wider sort of piece that you're trying to achieve. So having a super clear goal of what it is that you're looking to do with this. Potentially, it's just pure play charging. Potentially, it's something broader than that. I think it's probably the best place to be starting from. Is that a fair response?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe something which is a little bit up in time and fits very well to discuss here in Hubject is if one of the key things would be plug and charge, then you need to find hardware that also is compliant with plug and charge. Just to mention another item which is very frequently discussed these days.
Eugen, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would add a few aspects to this one. So what struck me the most over the last 2-3 years is that CPOs were not very much reluctant of ripping off hardware out of the ground because they were not satisfied because something was not working. Software used to be a very sticky business. We see plenty of tenders out in the market, even though larger CPOs considering even changing the software and operating more than 500 chargers with a different software. So nothing there is very much sticky, but everyone is trying to build something that lasts because it's still kind of technology that's blended into infrastructure for 10, 15 years. So what we have seen is where CPOs were struggling with is not choosing the hardware only because of power class, you have the right power electronics, the right roadmap, you have the right features. It's also embedding into the CPO's ecosystem to servicing the hardware. The worst thing that can happen is something is not working. Someone's calling EVA Global on a customer support, and they figure out they need to escalate on level 2, level 3. Someone needs to come. Is Equanetica coming the next 2 days and is going to fix the problem? Are they going to patch new software on it? This can stay for very long offline, right? If you cannot really fix it and service the hardware. So I think the servicing part is still very much underestimated. While again, as Torben said and the others said, all the hygiene factors, they need to be met. And if you don't meet them, like CPOs will just rip off the hardware out of the ground, and this was very much surprising to us, right?
And rather than reacting on the problem that occurred, more and more we are getting into predicting that the problem is going to happen. We're getting more and more into monitoring and identifying trends actually on the network. And that will definitely improve, and I agree with you, Eugene. Even not ripping off the equipment from its place, you will be able to predict that, for example, that equipment is going to have an issue, that equipment is going to end its own life anytime soon. So you'll be able to intervene in there, and you can even lower service costs because you can basically organize service trips rather than having an exclusive trip to somewhere in Norway that it takes you 7 hours to drive to, when you can have 3 charges along the way, and you can fix all 3 of them along the way. Before the driver actually needs to call EVA and needs to ask for let's say, for some help while in the middle of the snow, 7 hours away from anything. So.
I'd like to hear from Michael.
Yeah.
Wanted to add something?
When we talk about scale up this business, yes, this what we meet as a company, that it was not a problem to service a few devices, something like a few devices. When scale go up, yeah, and we have a lot of devices to service, it's a problem because every of these devices is very complex, yeah, software, hardware, etc. And a number of people who can service them is limited. Yeah, and currently, for example, in our company, we started project for predictive maintenance using machine learning, deep learning, because we have a lot of experiences limited to the group of persons, and we would like to use sophisticated solutions from the software part to add to our service something new. We, for example, had a small example. We asked ChatGPT, popular, yeah, about one of question what was from our customer. The answer was correct. 4 points, 3 was correct. Yes, when we dig deeper, yes, every answer was correct. We can use very sophisticated new software solution for predictive maintenance and for help our service guys after sales. And it's necessary in this big scale of number of devices, which will be bigger and bigger and bigger, not less.
Torben, yeah?
Just a quick one. I would say for when a breakdown happens, sooner or later a breakdown will happen with whatever equipment you're using. But the majority of operators are always using SLAs with their partners. So there is an SLA, a service level agreement that you are bound to, that if something happens, then say within X hours or days, you need this equipment to be running again. So you will never leave the users or your customers in the dark because you have to live up to the SLA that you signed off on in a contract.
All right, so now I do want to go back to software, because Daniel, I think it was you who said many of these pitfalls can be solved by software. So give us some examples of what can software do and where are the limitations, maybe.
Well, I think software probably can't hire somebody.
There you go.
But it is a real problem as your sort of teams expand. But proactive monitoring, for example, of hardware, and being able to sort of have a good predictive analysis of what's coming, where we think there's going to be faults, having different SLAs with sort of customers and asset owners to make sure that at different sort of service packages, they're getting parts delivered and upgrades and everything in different timelines. I think that's essential. So that's a big part of our sort of business, and but it is going to be a growing aspect. I'm trying to think about a couple of the other software points. It's been a little bit. Please, Torben.
Yeah, if I may add to it, just adding a few topics. I mentioned it before when I mentioned a lot of things, but software has the capability to unlock parallel revenues. So with the digital development, you can do much more with the hardware that you have invested in. By, for instance, I mentioned demand response technologies, which can be a little bit deep technical, like diving into frequency regulation or local DSO-based demand response. But all these things has tremendous value, as you can save a lot of investments, billions of euros investments, and you can only do it by software. The hardware is the key to unlock the revenue, and the software does actually give you the revenue. So just mentioning that hardware is your enabler, but software gives you much more in the width, I would say.
Maybe I'll come back at the end, please.
Do you want to add
I was
something?
actually.
I'm in there. Okay, so
Go for it.
maybe just on the partnerships piece as well. So I can't help myself. I am the guy, and we've got a great roaming team from ChargePoint. You were here today, but I'm working on lead the roaming efforts at ChargePoint in Europe and North America, and that is essentially partnerships plus software enabling drivers to be able to find and use more stations. So it's a combination of sort of both of those. And yes, software can help. And it is a big piece of the reliability. A station may be working perfectly, a backend may be working perfectly, but an EMSP app might be, or an API between the two platforms might not be 100% reliable or whatever, and that just allows a driver or a government agency or a utility to think that this isn't a reliable network, even though it's slightly out of the control. So you mentioned that partners are a problem, and I think partners are also the solution. Right? So how do we scale? We scale together. We scale together as an industry, working together on certified software. So for example, certified OCPI sort of platforms I think would be very cool to sort of say, yes, this is sort of in line with the actual standards, so we can have an integration. Another one would be, and then once you have that, the partnership in place with your partner, even if they may be a competitor at times, to actually be able to have processes in place to be able to have SLAs, to be able to proactively monitor somebody's behavior, to be able to proactively monitor token pools or sort of status syncs. All this stuff is within our remit. We just haven't quite gotten there yet, but it is based on the relationships that are largely in this room. So I really do think at the end of the day, we are only as strong as sort of the weakest link in that chain, particularly if we are offering public charging products, which is your bread and butter here.
Totally.
So it is about those partnerships and relationships that we will sort of sink or swim, and then the software is almost sort of like an enabling piece of that. So maybe it's the inverse answer you were looking for, but hopefully helpful.
Yeah, Emmanuel, and then Michael, how important is collaboration, and what is it supporting you the most in, let's say?
Collaborations, right?
I would say, what is collaboration the most important, for what is collaboration the most important from your view?
Close collaboration with our customers, yes, because we discuss about with our customers about requirements and how to deal with them, especially when we have different requirements from different customers. Of course, we have norms and standards, yes, and we, for example, one of presentation here, I heard that solution presented was compatible with some of car manufacturers. This is not good approach, in my opinion. Yeah? We should be compatible with norms and standards, not with particular producer of the car, for example. And we, of course, very, very care about the collaboration, for example, with producers of cars, but we try to achieve the moment when the software on both sides is compatible with norm, not compatible with current particular producer of car, but with norm. And we had opportunity, for example, and still have, to close collaboration, especially from companies from the market of e-bus market and e-truck. Yeah? And there we gathered the experience, and it was possible to create a solution which is tested, which is experienced, and is, in my opinion, very mature. But it was not possible if we work on this only alone, yeah, without collaboration with this manufacturer. Yeah.
No, I would say, I would say collaboration and standardization, of course, are part of the solution to every single problem that we have here. I would also, and this is our perspective as EVA, being global, being outside, and we like to consider ourselves basically the spider, putting on the spider web in between all the players. I would say also flexibility and adaptability, because of course we've seen in this industry there's almost no standardization. You can have two chargers side by side and have two completely different approaches, two completely different understanding of the standards, definitely. But then you need to be 100% integrating different standards, different let's say, different operations, and at the same time, cooperating with everybody. We're not alone, and as Daniel wisely mentioned, we're only as strong as the weakest link in our chain, and definitely we're all in this together, and we're bringing it forward and strengthening the chain.
Well, speaking of weak links, I want to come back to another topic which somebody mentioned ages ago, which is a reliable energy grid, right? So, I mean, how can we ensure that CPO infrastructure networks continue to grow in a healthy way, quickly, but we're still seeing growing grid capacity constraints, at least in Europe. So how do you think that should be managed?
There are, of course, many possibilities to do that, but we actually met with exactly that problem in many places in Europe. In some countries, it's more visible than others, especially in the Netherlands, I would say, where you can wait a long time to get grid connection. And one way to speed it up would be to combine power sources, like using PV panels, maybe together with batteries, add maybe some grid connection, or even thriving a little bit on power available from a building nearby to feed your charges. It becomes quite complex when you dive into it and how to actually control things, but we have developed techniques for that. So that's definitely one way you can speed up maybe getting more e-trucks to the market, or even higher volumes of EVs as well. It is a little bit of a pain with the long waiting time for power grid connection, but we also have to consider if it should go much faster, then again, the grid owners, they would need to invest billions of euros in order to meet the demand. And to save that, or maybe use them over a longer time, then PVs, batteries with a thin grid connection or without could definitely benefit in keeping a high speed with setting up chargers. That's at least one point, I would say.
Any other thoughts on how to get around sort of limitations of the grid or inconsistency in the reliability of the power grids? Like, what else can you do?
Maybe just from our side, great software services to help energy management. I think we're sort of looking at a lot of solar and battery storage pieces as well. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a large role for governments to help coordinate infrastructure upgrades.
Yeah. Power grids are already managed by control systems that monitor the power transfer along the grid. Maybe regulating or changing the charging profiles according to the available power, and having a proper way of communicating it to the driver. That could be one of the solutions, but I think we could be talking the rest of the afternoon here about this, and there's multiple solutions in the market. You're using batteries, utilizing renewable power sources, like even natural gas turbines, for example. There is multiple things in the market that can be used. It's just the way how to regulate it and how to regulate in between different chargers. So if you have a certain site with the exact same type of chargers, it's extremely easy to regulate the max power of that site. If you have a site with AC and DC chargers, for example, with different PWMs, it is extremely hard to regulate that unless you're using a centralized system and adapt it side by side.
Well, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would love to say a lot more about that, but maybe it becomes too boring. Let me know if it becomes too boring, and then I'll just...
We just want to get to all our topics and the other questions. We have 6 minutes, so I want to ask you more questions. But if you want to add something, please go ahead.
Well, it's not a must, but just a quick one then. There are many ways to incentivize the consumption. So there are ways where you can use the energy in a smarter way, for instance, for home charging, just to give an example. It could also be for B2B purposes. You can, again, use demand response functionalities to lower the consumption in grid areas where you have a lot of houses, so you don't overload transformers and so on. And with the increased consumption, then you can make sure that cars will be charged, maybe not with maximum speed, but overnight, for instance. Doesn't have to be full like 3 o'clock in the morning. It could as well be 7 o'clock in the morning, or maybe even 8 o'clock in the morning. And that would still satisfy the users quite well, I would claim. So there are many ways to do these things, and maybe we should look into combinations depending on the application.
Something else that I wanted to talk about is how are you going to pay for all of these things, right? So, I mean, at least we saw recently in the United States, the Biden administration announced it's allocating $5 billion for the states to help build chargers, you know, across like more than 50,000 miles of highway. And I mean, there's also another $2.5 billion to install chargers in underserved areas. I mean, this is a big deal. You know, if you want people, especially for trucks, let's say, who are traveling across rural areas, they need to feel secure that they can charge up their truck, even if they're in the middle of nowhere. So this is really, really important. How important is this kind of government support in cash, but also in willingness to kind of underscore the importance of electric mobility? Because it's not just about the money, it's also about visibility, it's about getting the conversation out, educating the public. So how would you evaluate the role of this kind of government support?
Maybe I'll start for the US question. So if our CEO was here, he'd probably say that there's loads going on in the market, target all the cash at infrastructure, as in electricity and sort of network upgrades. And there's more than enough demand to keep things going as it is. But I think overall, that might be one of the bigger areas for focus. I was very involved in some of the UK infrastructure investment design before as well. I think that's also a strategy in many of the countries that are emerging, sort of focusing on the sort of electricity infrastructure.
Michael? Yeah?
Yeah, my opinion about the help from governments and something like push is that we should assess this as on results, not about announcement about, for example, number of dollars which will be spent for that. Because sometimes this regulation is not realistic. I saw too many examples that, for example, charging station was built 2 years ago and still doesn't work because some regulations don't let to use this charging station. Okay, number is correct. Yeah, we built another charging station. Yeah, in a good place sometimes. Yeah, but doesn't work. This is not my responsibility.
This is maybe a question for Eugen. So I just mentioned this money coming from the government, and as Michael put it, money alone is not enough. Like, it actually has to make sense, and it has to be implemented, and it has to be successful. So show me the money and then do something smart with it, I guess. But if the government is not throwing so much money at you, what are some other sources of funding? Where else could public charging operations get support for expanding their business, for scaling? Our management consultancy maybe can help with that kind of advice.
I think moving over from public money, government money, I think it sounds like a complex question, whereas the answer is very banal, right? Private money. And I think the number of transactions and investments, it just went up by 20 times over the last 2-3 years. And this is all across the value chain, because when the public government money was spent or allocated, people were incentivized to create creative solutions, right? Deutschlandnetz, people come up with a solution to find great locations for their chargers, right? If you allocate a different scheme to incentivize people, people come up with great software solutions, something different, right? Through this and through all the different products which do went to the market, right, this also attracted private money. And we now see that it's not only about putting money into CPOs, which might move from north to south, from west to east. It's also about investing into someone who's growing into the e-bus or e-truck system as ICNC23. EVA Global is interesting. I think every bit and piece along the value chain has its validity to be there, and it yields also attractive returns. Hence why I think it became very interesting for private investors in this field. And it's moving from a bit of a VC game of it's still a bet or not, where we see patterns that if they run their own math, they see a higher likelihood that this will turn out into a profitable business, but you still need to tick off a few hygiene criteria. So there is enough private money, even though we're not in the best sentiment in the industry, and cost of capital is also increasing. But I think the willingness from private investors is offsetting the sentiment, because the business model and the business itself has proven itself over the last 2-3 years, and I think this will only accelerate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
I fully agree. We see a huge interest from private investors. The only thing is that the business case needs to be sound for them to be willing to invest, of course. And that means that concession periods needs to be long enough for the business case to be sound, return on investment, and so on. I mean, you can easily find solutions for setting up a lot of charges if the landowner can agree to long concession periods and so on. And I'm sure that will make it would be easy for me to make a sound business case based on that, at least.
All right, why don't we turn over to our audience and give them a chance to ask you guys some questions. Once again, also for our participants who are joining us via the live stream, do use the app to send us your questions or comments for the panelists. And here in Berlin, you all have the option of also using the app, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and somebody will bring you a microphone and you can speak up. So why don't we start maybe first, if anybody in the room is feeling inspired to stand up and ask a question or even make a comment. Are those arms or those are just phones snapping pictures? Okay, never mind, it's a phone. Okay, so let's turn first to the app and see what questions have been sent in. So what do you think about dynamic pricing, and would it increase utilization of charging infrastructure? Torben is very anxious to answer this question, so I will not stop you. Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, we have done that for quite a long time. So and we have had tremendous success with it. It gives the end user the possibility to actually have an optimal pricing, I would say, because as a CPO, you lower the risk if you can use dynamic pricing. You know the electricity price and you know your margin, so you will never reach a price that are smaller or lower than your actual costs on the electricity production. So it's a benefit for all, I would say. Lower risk on the CPO side, better pricing on the end user side. I think it's wonderful, and we do it today in a number of countries.
Does everyone agree, or you have a different take? Maybe.
At least for public charging infrastructure, there's a lot of discussion about this. I can see there will be more trials and aspects to see how this will land in the market. I think one of the interesting pieces will be CPO MSP relationships around dynamic pricing. Settlement between these entities at the moment is complex, sometimes time-consuming, often full of manual processes. To be able to move from something where we have price increases on a network every 3 months, that is written 2 weeks beforehand and email blasted to a bunch of people, to something where we have dynamic sort of settlement or pricing changes every half an hour for groups of specific chargers within regions. That's a big shift in how the market would work. And I think this is what I was trying to talk about earlier, like partnership. To be able to really roll that out across all the different MSPs in the market is going to require a lot of collaboration and discussing with each other about how we're going to make sure that certain things are on each other's roadmaps so everyone can support it.
Maybe just to add to it, You're definitely right. It's not easy to solve, and also across roaming partners, for instance, there are some issues for sure. It's always much easier if it's on your own network, and we do hourly update of the dynamic pricing. You can see 24 hours ahead what the pricing will be because we have the spot pricing, the EPEX signals coming in. So it's fairly easy for us to model that and reflect it to the end user. They can see the price 24 hours ahead before they start charging. So it's visible for everybody. And we have only met success with it, but I fully agree, it's not solved across all countries yet. In some countries, you're not allowed to change the price that frequent. So, of course, there are boundaries that we need to look into altogether.
Yep.
Okay, let's see if anybody in our audience would like to ask a question, maybe on this side of the room. Did somebody raise their hand? Where? There, all the way on this side of the room. And there's a microphone. Yep, go ahead.
I was wondering if you're able or want to share a kind of a fuck-up story or something that really went wrong in the past and how you fixed it. Or if the slighter question that is a bit more not so harmful maybe is something that you see as a big challenge that you had to face and how you addressed it now.
I love this question. I think sometimes you can learn a lot more from the worst practice than from the best practice, right? So that's actually a really, really interesting question. So yeah, something that didn't quite go as you had hoped and what you learned from that. Yes, Torben, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure it's a fuck up, but one thing that I see as a challenge, at least, is a missing standard for roaming implementation. I wouldn't call it a fuck up, but it's actually a hassle. We are on a number of roaming platforms, but we're also doing bilateral roaming, which often is being implemented with OCPI. And please don't shoot me, OCPI is not a standard. So far, I've not seen two OCPI implementations that are completely similar. They're always individual, which creates a little bit of maintenance work, expensive maintenance work for the operator and for the other partner. So here I would pray for maybe having a standard in the future if it's possible, and then at least lower that barrier. I know it's not easy to make a standard. Everybody needs to agree, and it needs to be functional and all that. There's a long way to the standard, but it would be great to have one.
I have an example which is a bit complex. We had, for one of our clients, a different CPO has developed for us a plug-and-charge functionality in a given country. And this CPO became a big competitor for us, and we wanted to get rid of this backend, including, however, we were promising that we were one of the first CPOs out in the market with the plug-and-charge functionality, so it was almost kind of a dilemma. Are we remain with the supplier or the competitor CPO while they're going just to increase the footprint and we will have less customers, or are we going to get rid of them, which would require a high cost and probably a long timeline of fixing it? So it's kind of like there are plenty of dilemma situations which are the worst. It's less about your hardware is not functioning, you replace it, your CPMS company went bankrupt. Okay, deal with it. It sounds easy, right? It isn't, right? But things you can replace, I would say, are rather easier than if you have to face dilemmas. And dilemmas, especially in this industry where there's no clear path which to take, you gotta rely on the gut feeling of the CEO, right? This is the most difficult thing because it can turn out both ways, which might be right or wrong.
Yeah, thanks for that, for the honesty. Always appreciated. I think we have a couple of minutes for another question or two. So I'm just scanning the room. And we can take one from the app. So what role does error monitoring play in your maintenance operation? So,
Okay.
Michael, you want to tackle that one?
Maybe I will start.
next.
This is the big role because without this we cannot maintenance and service our products. To be honest, from the beginning, when we start to deliver first DC charging station, we decided to build own solution to monitor them. At the beginning, it is totally own solution, not based on standards like OCPP, but quickly, of course, we migrate to the standard, to the OCPP, and we still develop this system because new requirements from our customers should be implemented. And from the beginning, we recognize that it will be very important in the future, and we will shoot in the future to work parallelly with the OCPP system of our customers. And we decided, for example, to add feature to our function to our charging station that we can connect our charging station with two CSMS. One is typical service using a standard OCPP, and the second one is our customer. Yeah? And it works for today. Yeah? And it was necessary. Why? Because we called our software as a soul of our solution. This is a soul, yeah? The hardware, but software is a soul of our solution. And when something happens in our charging station, many times a service goes to the IT guys. Could you read something in information from monitoring system to recognize what is the reason of the problem? And in many cases, because the solution is mature and mature, more mature still, we can read more and more information remotely, and it's necessary to done the perfect service at the site.
Yeah. I would say as well that not only it's very limiting to mention only error monitoring. I would say monitoring itself. Error is only one of the stages of the monitoring that you do. And then, as it was mentioned before, as any machine learning algorithm, as any data input and evolving system, whatever you monitor, it's gonna have to impact the maintenance. Otherwise, there's almost no point in doing monitoring itself.
Any final thoughts from any of our panelists? Because we basically need to wrap up quickly.
I would say it's super essential to have proactive monitoring on all the infrastructure assets that are out there. For us, it's very, very important so that we can fix any malfunctions very fast as possible, and as much as possible per remote, saving money, saving time, increasing uptime. And exactly as you mentioned, root cause handling is sometimes very necessary if it's not obvious whatever the problem is. So having these elements in play in the daily operation is super, super important.
Maybe if I could chime in, we've also announced our own 24/7 global network operating center in the last 2 weeks. So this is also a pretty critical component for us. But then, as you're saying, it's the enabling processes around it to make sure that something actually gets done, which is where the real value is. Thank you.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. And just a quick reminder, if you were not able to hear your question answered because we ran out of time, don't worry. You can always approach any of our speakers directly, either in person, or you can reach out to them and send them an email. And I know that they're always very happy to answer anybody's questions. So don't give up, follow up on them, and I'm sure you'll get an answer. But gentlemen, thank you so much. Michael, Emmanuel, Daniel, Torben, and Eugen, really great to hear from all of you. Many thanks.
Thank you.